Belgian horses, so they're that big draft kind of breed, very, very strong. Pretty good workers. They haven't been in team for that long. Betty has another teammate called Judy. Betty is the one that is on our left-hand side and Gus is on our right-hand side. Betty doesn't really like Gus all that much. He's kind of that twerky little brother, and I'm sure that Betty would much prefer having Judy by her side instead of Gus. Gus is the little one, for those of you who are sitting up in front. But Betty does act like a pretty good sister sometimes. We always need to have another horse with Gus in order to hold his hoof every now and again when he gets a little bit scared by the traffic, which is why we have him on our right-hand side, kind of on the off side of the oncoming traffic. But they are a pretty good team. They're both about, I think Betty is about 16 years old and Gus is around 17 or so. So they're pretty area, everything from small little cottages to great big wooden mansions. What's up, team? Inside this pretty little yellow house on the corner is one of our registered heritage homes. You can see next to the door there is an oval plaque, and that means that that house has been registered as a heritage site with the city of Victoria. We have a building that is at least 85 years old. You can choose to register it with the city as being a heritage site. It's a very similar concept to listed in the UK, and after you register your home, there are some very strict rules that you need to adhere to about what you can do to the building. The Heritage Committee kind of dictates the colors of paint that you're allowed to use on the houses and the materials you are allowed to maintain your house with. And of course you are never, ever, ever allowed to knock your house down, ever. Even if it becomes completely structurally unsound, you still need to let it fall down by its own volition, and you're not allowed to knock it down yourself either. This one has some pretty interesting architectural details, most notably those little spires right up at the top. Those are called witch spikes, apparently. Yes, you heard right, witches. Victorians at the turn of the century were incredibly superstitious folk, and they thought that if they put these witch spikes, so these little spires on top of their roofs, this would deter witches from landing on their roof on their broomstick and, I guess, stealing their children to eat them for dinner. We certainly have quite the deer population in the city of Victoria, even in these built-up residential areas. I know when I first came to Victoria from Alberta, which is the next province over, where we don't have quite the same deer population, I would notice these deer coming out to my garden early in the morning, and I would tell everyone in my house, like, oh, there's deer outside, get the camera, everyone be really quiet, aren't they beautiful and majestic, and et cetera, et cetera. And these days I'm like beating them off with a broomstick, and I'm yelling at the deer, stay away from my gladiola, on it, and everyone knows that purple is typically reserved for the nobility, as it's such an expensive pigment to produce. So these people certainly had an awful lot of money if you were able to paint your house purple or parts of it purple. Kind of the equivalent of parking a nice Corvette outside your house these days, showing off to your neighbors how much money you had. That blue house actually is rumored to have a couple of chickens living in the backyard. Sometimes you see these chickens wandering around, flocking, laying eggs, whatever it is that hens do. There is a bylaw in Victoria that says you can have our inner harbor, and you can see the nose of the Clipper ferry, or I guess the stem of the Clipper ferry. I'm not really up on my boat terminology, you'll have to forgive me. The Clipper is a ferry that goes from Victoria to Seattle, and it takes about 3 hours to get from port to port. We also have a larger boat called the Coho that will go across from Victoria to Port Angeles, and that takes just about an hour to get across. So we have the inner harbor. It used to be called the James Bay, hence of course the name of the neighborhood we were just in, named after James Douglas. Remember, that was the guy who founded Fort Victoria back in 1843. These days we call it the inner harbor, and we also have an upper harbor. The inner harbor is where all of the tourist activities take place, and the upper harbor is where more of the commercial ventures happen. So the commercial fishing and some industrial recycling, things like that. So over on our right-hand side, we are going around a very, very small park. This is called Quadra Park, and in a few minutes you'll be able to see a very small bust of a man named Captain Quadra. Captain Quadra was a Spanish explorer here in the early 19th century, and he was one of the very first men to chart Vancouver Island and the surroundings. Over to our right-hand side, about 2 o'clock on the circle, you'll see a great big dome and a golden man on top of that, and that is George Vancouver. Slight differences in their levels of fame. Last man standing, absolutely. You'll also see the start of these beautiful hanging flower baskets that we have been hanging for 103 years, and we're up to about 1,300 that we hang from our baskets starting in April every year. Where the exit only sign in, you see one of the many, many examples of public art that we have here in Victoria. And you know, I must not be very artistically minded, and the only thing that I can think of that it looks like is a couple of chopsticks stuck in an avocado. But I have tried to be artistically minded, and I just can't think of anything else that it could be. So if anyone has any other ideas, please share. We're just about to cross over the smelliest street in all of Victoria. This is where all of the single person carriages like to hang out, and if you want a fancy way to get back to the ship afterwards, you can always come over here and I'll take you back down.